Okay, recording started. You can go ahead and take it away.
Great. So Brother Lee tells me that the recording has started, and so I would like to welcome you all to this evening's Come Follow Me study group. And I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen so we can talk about what it is we're studying. So give me a sec here. And I will do that. Share, and I'm going to bring up, you should be seeing now the welcome to Come Follow Me study group. Yeah?
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. All right. So starting today, our reading is from the book of Job. And then starting a week from today, we do Psalms in two groups. Okay. We do half of them, and then we do the other half. So this reading in Job is very selective. There's 32 chapters in Job, and we don't read them all. So I'll just talk, I'll mostly introduce the book of Job in its entirety. But you're not reading it in its entirety. You're just reading these passages. And then I'll talk a little bit about Psalms. So again, the purposes of this Come Follow Me study is to provide background and context for the Come Follow Me lessons and explore resources and ideas for Come Follow Me study in our homes. And then to discuss or address any questions from the reading. We can do it here in class or afterwards. You can contact me at my email address here, je5clark@yahoo.com. So I just want to review a little bit as to where we are. And this is the structure of the Old Testament. So there's the law of Moses, there's the history that goes clear through Esther. And now we're at a section called poetry. It's sometimes called the writings, but these are all poetic books: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. And then after that group, we start with the major prophets, which include Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. They just mean they're the biggest books. And then 12 of the minor prophets, which are smaller, okay? That just means the books are smaller. They're arranged kind of by size. And that's from the Hebrew Bible a little bit, okay? Technically in the Hebrew Bible, Lamentations is also part of poetry, part of the writings. But in ours, because we assume that it's written by Jeremiah, and then we just continue as part of Jeremiah with Lamentations. So our little talk about poetry is going to be important, not only because of the poetic books, but a lot of the prophets, their prophecies are in poetry, okay? So unfortunately, our LDS scriptures, as they are formatted, you can't tell that any of it's in poetry. It's just verse and stuff like that. So it's good to know. It's also good to compare some other translations just to understand that they are poetry. So a little bit about poetry versus prose, just in general. Prose is most everyday writing is in prose form. The language of prose is straightforward without much decoration. Ideas are contained in sentences that are arranged into paragraphs, okay? Poetry is typically reserved for expressing something special in an artistic way. The language of poetry tends to be more expressive or decorated, with comparisons, rhyme, rhythm contributing to a different sound and feel. There's far more metaphorical imagery in poetry than there is in prose. And at least in English poetry and in lots of poetry, ideas are contained in lines that may or may not be sentences, and lines are arranged in stanzas, okay? So one easy way to tell the difference between poetry and prose is that in most prose, it goes from the left, at least in English, it goes from the left to the right in a block. In poetry, the right is all different shapes, okay? It's just, it doesn't always run from one to the other. And the end of the poetic line is not necessarily the end of the idea or the end of the sentence, okay? So before we go into the book of Job, I want to show you something on a place that will be very helpful. It's in our Come Follow Me things, but I'm going to start here. If you have your Come Follow Me book, you can look at it. It's in a little section just before Job, but I'm going to show you how you get here. We can go to libraries, the Gospel Library. Okay. My computer's really slow, so I'll talk while it shows up. Then we're going to come to Come Follow Me, see? And we're going to go to Individuals and Families, because that's what we're going to look at. And we'll go to Old Testament 2022, okay? If we go down here and look, we are in August, the beginning of August, right? We're going to open it there. And right before this is a little section that's thoughts to keep in mind reading poetry in the Old Testament. So this is a really good section that I suggest you study and look at together with your families if you're gonna read, okay? In the Old Testament books that come before the book of Job, we find stories, lots of narrative, lots of history. Noah built an ark, Moses delivered Israel, all of those things. We've already seen a few examples of poetry sprinkled throughout the historical books of the Old Testament, but from Job forward, we're going to see a lot more. The books of Job, Psalms, Proverbs are most entirely poetry, as are part of the writings of the prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Amos. Because reading poetry is different from reading a story, you need to think about that. Here's some things that will help make your reading of the Old Testament more meaningful, okay? Hebrew poetry, as opposed to English poetry, is not based on rhyme, like in English, and there's a rhythm and wordplay and a repetition of sounds. That's all features of ancient Hebrew, but they don't translate very well into English. One of the features that you will notice that translates is a thing called parallelism, okay? This is a simple one from Isaiah. Put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem. So it's an idea repeated. Put on thy strength, Zion, put on thy strength. It's compared to put on thy beautiful garments. Zion is compared to Jerusalem. The 29th Psalm has many parallel lines. This is an example. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. Okay, so it'll repeat those things, those parallelisms. Okay. And here's an instance from Amos where knowing the second line is parallel to the first makes the passage easier to understand in the language of our King James Version. I have also given you cleanness of teeth in all your cities and want of bread in all your places. So cleanness of teeth is an idiom for hunger and starvation, okay? Okay, cleanness of teeth and want of bread, want of food in all your places. In these examples, the idea is repeated with slight differences. It could be used to emphasize the repeated idea while using the differences to more fully describe or develop it, okay? Sometimes they describe contrasting ideas. In Proverbs, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So that's called in English antithesis. One idea balanced against the opposite. It doesn't happen by accident. The writers did it intentionally. And so they express truths in that way, okay? So think of Hebrew poetry. These are ways to think of Hebrew poetry as a friend, okay? You might compare reading the Old Testament poetry to meeting somebody from a distant country in a foreign culture who doesn't speak the same language that we do and who happens to be over 2,000 years old, okay? We may not understand at first, but we need to keep at it. So when you read a passage from Isaiah, what's my general impression? How does the passage make you feel, even if you don't understand every word? Then read it again several times, remembering that one of the objectives of poetry is to get you to feel and see things not in a literal way, okay? Also, if you're familiar with the term chiasmus, which is another kind of parallelism that kind of moves in a pyramid fashion. You have one idea, another idea, another idea, another idea, and then you have the apex, and then the following lines go backwards and express those ideas, okay? So that also happens, okay? And then the last little point is one category of Old Testament poetry is called wisdom literature. Job's, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, even Psalms, okay? They deal with deep philosophical issues. The book of Job, for example, talks about justice and what is the reason for human suffering, okay? So it's thoughtful conversations with inspired mentors who want to share some observations about God and the world he created. So really keep an open mind. I would also suggest that it would be good, you can find this online, you can find the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew scriptures, online, and you can actually see the poetry in English translation, okay? And that will help a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind as we're going through Job and the rest of the poetic books. So here's the first thing to know. The book of Job is structured like a play, okay? There are, so even though Job may have been a historical, real person, what's in the Hebrew Bible is a play about Job. Just like in Shakespeare, Shakespeare wrote his history plays about like King Henry V or King Henry IV and King Henry VI. They were historical people, but they are plays based on that historical person. So this is the structure in general of the book of Job. It's structured as an extended dialogue between Job and his friends and eventually God in poetic form. There's a prologue that includes chapter 1 and chapter 2 that are in prose. Chapter 1 takes place in the heavens above the earth. Chapter 2 takes place on the earth. And then there's a dialogue between Job and his friends. That's chapters 3 through 31. Then there's another friend who doesn't speak until chapter 32. His name is Elihu. And once he speaks, he just keeps going, 32 through 37. Then God speaks to Yahweh, speaks to Job, and Job replies to him. That's 38 through 42, verse 6. And then there's an epilogue, which is in prose, 42, 7 through 17. Okay? So that's the basic structure as you read along. Now we're only reading little pieces, our required reading is only little pieces of this, but that is the basic structure. Okay? So the main characters in the book of Job are God, also known as Yahweh. Yahweh is the name that it's mostly translated in our English scriptures as the Lord, capital L, capital O-R-D. Okay, if you see the Lord in all caps, that's Yahweh. He's the one who made the covenant with Abraham and with Moses. Then there is the Satan, the accuser, the prosecutor, or the adversary. In the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Job, this never appears as Satan as a name. It's always a role. And Satan actually means the accuser, the prosecutor, or the adversary. So, like, the adversary is a role that Lucifer takes on, but in this, it's the Satan. There's Job, who is described as a perfect and upright man, perfect meaning complete. He is a man of the land of Uz, which we think is the land of Edom, okay? We're not really sure where these places are. His friends are Eliphaz the Temanite. He lives in a city called Teman. We don't know where that is. Bildad the Shuhite, who lives in the city of Shuhai. And Zophar the Naamathite, who lives in the city of Naamath. And then there's Elihu, who appears. He listens for a very long time, and then he can't stop from expressing himself. So he goes, right? So most of the structure is that you have dialogue between Eliphaz and Job, and then Bildad and Job, and then Zophar and Job, and then Eliphaz and Job, and Bildad and Job, and Zophar and Job. So They do almost 2.5 rounds, but before Zophar can end the third round, Elihu comes in and just talks. Okay. So just so you have a sense, we think that Uz is possibly in the land of Edom. So this is the Dead Sea. Up here, you'll see the Sea of Galilee is up here. This is Samaria, which was the capital of the kingdom of Israel, which is, of course, and Jerusalem, which is the capital of the kingdom of Judah. There's Beersheba. There's the Dead Sea. Here's Moab, where the Moabites live, and the Ammonites live here. These little divisions are these little lines here are kind of the divisions between the tribes. And then Edom is way south, right? So we think that Uz is possibly in the land of Edom. All right. So this is from the Bible dictionary about the book of Job. Job's 3 friends discuss with him the meaning of his sufferings. They give their interpretation, and mostly they say that they are a sign of God's anger and punishment for sin. So each of Job's friends tries to say that the reason that you're suffering is because God's angry at you or because you've sinned. You need to examine your conscience and make sure that you haven't sinned. Job will not admit that. Their suggestions ring from him words without knowledge, which is what he says in chapter 38, verse 2, which he afterwards retracts. Yet Job is declared by God to have spoken the thing that is right concerning his divine government. That's in 42, verse 7. In saying that there is a mystery in the incidents of suffering that only a fresh revelation can solve. So his friends go through a kind of a back and forth of, well, you must have sinned. Have you done this? Have you done that? Have you done this? Have you done that? Okay. We often talk about the patience of Job. Job is not particularly patient. He doesn't just sit and suffer without complaining. He complains to God. He complains to his friends. He rails against the unfairness of it. What Job is faithful. He never denounces God. He insists there must be some explanation that we don't know, and I will be faithful to God. All right. More from the Bible dictionary. Job 32 through 37 contains the speeches of Elihu. He's just been listening this whole time. He's shocked that Job would talk back to God. Impiety in the part of Job. And he condemns him, though on different grounds, from the 3 friends. His main idea is God will not pervert judgment. Okay. So God is faithful. You know what I mean? And Job makes no reply to him. Okay. God's judgment is God's. His own craving for light is satisfied by the vision of God, and at length vouchsafed in the answer to his appeals. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eyes see thee. Okay. So Job really gets an answer by revelation from God, but the answer is a little bit different than anyone expects. The book of Job narrates the afflictions that befalls a righteous man and discusses the moral problems such suffering present. The book of Job doesn't ever entirely answer the question as to why Job or any human might suffer pain in the loss of his goods. It does make it clear that affliction is not necessarily evidence that one has sinned. The book suggests that affliction, if not for punishment, may be for experience, discipline, and instruction, like we read in Doctrine and Covenants 122. His unfailing faith is characterized by such exclamations as, though he slay me, yet I will trust in him. Job is mentioned in Ezekiel, in James, and in Doctrine and Covenants 121 and 10. All right. So before we leave Job, let me just, if you want to open your scriptures, if you have them, to Job chapter 1, I'm just going to read a couple of verses from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew scriptures, okay? The Hebrew translation of the scriptures. Verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz named Job. That man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. And then in verse 6, that's the beginning of, in verse 6 it says, one day the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord. That's Lord with capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. And the adversary came among them. The Lord said to the adversary, where have you been? And the adversary answered the Lord, I have been roaming all over over all the earth. Verse 8, the Lord said to the adversary, have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and an upright man who fears God and shuns evil. The adversary answered the Lord, does Job not have good reason to fear God? Why, it was you that has fenced him round, him and his household, and all that he has. You has blessed his efforts so that his possessions sprout out all over the land. Okay? So that's kind of a little bit of the difference, the simplicity of the language, and it also shows that ours says Satan, it's the adversary, okay? It's a role that Lucifer plays in this, okay? And so that's just an idea. So as you go through these verses, as you try to understand, you can look up online. There are versions of the Tanakh, Tanakh, or the Jewish Bible that you can read and see, okay? And the poetry will become clear to you, all right? So any questions or anything that I can answer before we move on to a little bit of an overview of Psalms? Okay. Bueller, anybody, you can unmute and just ask.
Quick question for you. What again, set of scriptures were you reading from there? Because that didn't line up with the King James Version.
No, it doesn't. I told you.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Right. So I'm reading from the Tanakh.
Okay.
The Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew, English translation of the Hebrew scriptures, the original. Okay. So one of the issues that we have with the King James Version of the Bible is that it's in translation twice. It's in translation from the Hebrew Bible to English that is also 400 years old. And over 400 years, the English in the King James Version of the Bible has changed. So part of what I do professionally is teach about Shakespeare, okay? The King James Version and the language of Shakespeare are about the same age, okay? And even though Shakespeare is considered early modern English, it's not contemporary English. So a lot of what we do is sort of translations from Shakespearean language into modern language, okay? So we believe the Bible to be the word of God as far as it is translated correctly, okay? So any other version, I particularly like the version of the Hebrew scriptures because that's who the book is addressed to. That's who originally it was for, okay? So yeah, that's what I was reading from. And if you're new to these, in my teaching, I use the Tanakh all the time when I teach live. You know what I mean? Tanakh, okay? So, and I'll reference it quite a bit. All right. So then let's talk about the Book of Psalms. The Book of Psalms is a collection of poetic lyrics to songs and hymns. It's a little bit like if you included our hymn book in the scriptures, but just the lyrics, not the music, okay? There are several categories of Psalms. These are a few of them. There are hymns, which are songs of praise for God's work in creation or history. There are communal laments, which are songs in which the nation of Israel laments some communal disaster, like the loss of the 10 tribes, like being carried away into Babylon. Those are communal laments that the whole nation suffers. Royal psalms deal with such matters as the king's coronation, marriage, and battles. Individual laments are psalms lamenting the fate of the psalmist, the one who wrote the words. And there are individual thanksgiving psalms that thank God for deliverance from personal distress. Those are some. So they're not all going to be the same, but as you're reading through them, you might think, oh, this kind of fits into a category of a communal one where the whole nation is lamenting, or this is a more personal one, or this is communal thanksgiving, or this is individual mourning, okay? So from the Bible dictionary about Psalms, you'll see a lot of interesting words in the middle of the Psalms. Some Psalms were accompanied by stringed instruments. And these are words that are mentioned in the texts. For example, Psalms 4, 54 through 55, 61, 67, 76. Others by wind instruments. Those are nihiloth, that's in Psalm 5. While others have titles such as set to Alamoth, or maidens, or set to Sheminith, the octave. It seems to imply that there were singing parts. And like our hymn book, sometimes it'll say, it'll give names to the tune. So sometimes these little notations are about either the instruments that are played, the choral singing that's involved, or it's a familiar tune. So in our hymn book, we have two, we have two sacrament hymns of two different ones. I'm trying to think. We have two different tunes for one set of the hymns. I don't have my hymn book with me, or I would look it up. Let me see if I can see it from here. We have two of, I just have my DVDs. I mean, my CDs of the hymns. While of these emblems we partake. We have, while of these emblems we partake. And we have, while of these emblems we partake. And if you look in the hymn book, right under it, you'll see that there's sung to the tune of blank, okay? And they'll give you a tune. Okay. Some of the titles appear to intended to indicate the nature or character of the psalm, as maschil, giving instruction. That includes 32, 42, 44 through 45, 52 through 55, all of those. And michtam, which sometimes is called the golden psalm, which is 16 and 56 through 60. While shigainon may refer to the irregular or erratic style of the compositions, and gittith belongs to Gath. They may relate either to the melody or the instrument used in performance. So that's just explains sometimes it's translated into English, but then these little Hebrew terms pop up, and they might be instruments, they might be names of familiar tunes, they might indicate like the nature of the psalm, or relate to the melody or instruments used, okay? So here's some interesting stuff about the Book of Psalms, these lyrics, these poems that are set to music. 73 of the Psalms are ascribed to David, King David. For example, Psalm 21. This is literally this middle part is what is in our King James Version. It says Psalm 21, a messianic psalm of David. He tells the glory of the great king. The king will triumph over all his enemies. Their evil designs will fall. And then it says, to the chief musician, a psalm from David, okay? So this is verse 1. The king shall joy in thy strength, O Lord, and in thy salvation, how greatly shall he rejoice. Thou hast given him his heart's desire and hast not withholden the request of his lips. And then it says Selah, S-E-L-A-H. Selah is a Hebrew word found at the ending of the verses in Psalms and has been interpreted as an instruction calling for a break in the singing. It appears 71 times in the Psalms of the Hebrew Bible. So when you come across the word Selah, it just means take a break and reflect, okay? Comes at the end of the stanzas in the book of Psalms, okay? So these are just ideas that will help you as you read through the Psalms with your families. Think about what categories they might fall into. Think about what these might mean. And Selah means to stop or pause, okay? Now, just like our hymns have great meaning in and of themselves, so do the Psalms, okay? And sometimes that can be very personal, okay? So again, it's about how it makes you feel, okay? And there are some doctrinal things in it, of course, just as there are doctrinal things in our hymns, but they're mostly meant to to express emotion related to either praise or lamenting or everyday things or thanksgiving, royal things, things that happen with the king. Because remember, the king in Israel stands in for the Lord many times. Solomon dedicated his own temple, okay, as the king of Israel, okay? So prophet, priest, king, okay? Prophet, one who receives the word of the Lord, priest, ones who can stand in for the Lord, and king, one who represents the Lord on the earth. That's in the Hebrew Bible, that is a progression. Prophet, priest, king. It's not just naming the same thing over again. It's a little bit of a progression. All right. So that's kind of what, in this short little half hour, that's kind of what I prepared as a background. I don't mean to interpret them for you, but I hope you can use some of these things as you read through to help you understand and get a feeling about what these scriptures can mean and get a feeling for them. So are there any questions or other concerns before we kind of wrap up? Bueller?
No, I think it's
Okay.
been pretty clear. Thanks.
Okay. So this is different than I typically do a lot of history because we don't know any, but now that historical books are over, it's really about helping us understand who these people are. When we get to the prophets, it's literally where they fit into the history that will become important because literally they're arranged from the longest book to the shortest ones. Okay. So again, just as a review, the purpose is to provide background and context, explore resources and ideas for studying in our homes. And then this is my email address. And finally, the reading is for this week, Job 1 through 3, 12 through 14, 19, 21 through 24, 38 through 40, and 42. It's a sprinkling of Job. And this is, and the Psalms represent a sprinkling of the first half of the Psalms, okay? The first part, okay? When we meet again in 2 weeks, the first bit is gonna be Psalms, and then we'll move on to Proverbs, okay? That's what the reading material becomes, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing this at this moment in my career so I can say thank you. And again, if you have questions, you can email me. And I hope we'll see you or at least hear from you. I don't mind if your cameras are on or off. I've taught so many Zoom classes in school. It doesn't bother me. If you don't want to be part of the video, that's cool with me and just be a voice. I'm perfectly fine with that. So thank you for joining. Thank you, Brother Lee. And I guess you're going to end the recording, right?
Yep, I'm going to stop recording now, and then we'll get it onto YouTube here shortly.
Thanks. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks, hopefully.
Yep, sounds
Thank you.
good. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Brother Clark.
Mhm.
Have a good week.
Thanks, John.
Bye.